When my ex's mother called after almost a year of silence, I almost ignored it. Not because I was angry, but because hearing her voice brought back everything I had spent months trying to forget. She said a storm had broken her backyard fence. I told myself it was just a quick repair, just a few boards, a loose gate and an hour of work. But the moment she looked at me and quietly said, "Finish it and I'll make it worth your while," I realized she wasn't talking about the fence anymore, and what happened after that changed all three of our lives forever. My name is Ethan Carter, and for most of my life, fixing broken things had always been easier than fixing broken relationships. I worked as a carpenter in a small North Carolina town where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. My relationship with my ex, Olivia, had ended almost a year earlier. There hadn't been screaming, betrayal, or dramatic accusations. She simply looked at me one evening and admitted she wanted a faster life than the one I could offer. She dreamed about expensive cities, ambitious people, and constant excitement. I believed in quiet evenings, honest work, and promises that lasted longer than feelings somewhere along the way. Those differences became impossible to ignore. She packed her things, hugged me goodbye like I was an old friend instead of the man she once planned a future with, and disappeared into a different life. Her mother, Margaret, had always treated me with a kindness that made no noise. She remembered how I took my coffee, asked about my father's health without being reminded, and somehow noticed when I was carrying more weight on my shoulders than I admitted aloud during my relationship with Olivia. I never thought much about it. She was simply a thoughtful woman who cared about people. After the breakup, I assumed I'd never see her again. When I pulled into her driveway that afternoon, the fence really was damaged. A heavy oak branch had knocked down an entire section. Leaving the backyard exposed, Margaret stood beside the broken boards wearing gardening gloves and an old denim shirt with faded sleeves. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the smile of someone trying to relive the past. It looked more like relief. "You actually came," she said softly. "I said I would. I wasn't sure you'd still want to." "I almost didn't," she nodded slowly, as if she respected the honesty more than a polite lie. I spent the next hour measuring posts, replacing cracked boards, and resetting the gate. Margaret never hovered. Every now and then she'd hand me a bottle of water or move branches out of my way before quietly returning to her flower beds. There was something comforting about the silence between us. It didn't demand conversation. It simply existed. When I finally tightened the last hinge, she stepped closer and tested the gate herself. It closed perfectly. "You saved me a week's wait," she said with a grateful smile. "Now let me keep my promise. You don't owe me anything." "I know," she replied, "but I'd still like to thank you." She disappeared into the house and returned with 2 plates of homemade peach pie and fresh coffee instead of cash. I laughed. "I thought you meant money." "I know what you thought," she answered with a playful smile. "I just figured homemade pie would last longer in your memory." She was right. We sat on the back porch while the evening sun turned the sky orange. We talked about everything except Olivia work, neighbors, old movies, gardening disasters, and how every storm seemed stronger than the last. For the first time in months, I laughed without forcing it. Then my phone buzzed. "Olivia." I stared at the screen before answering. "I heard you're at my mom's house," she said without even saying hello. "Yeah, why?" She needed help. You know how weird that sounds, right? I looked toward Margaret, who quietly stood to give me privacy. Even though she couldn't possibly hear the conversation, it's only weird if someone decides it. There was silence. Then Olivia sighed. "Just don't make this complicated." After she hung up, Margaret returned carrying fresh coffee. "You didn't have to leave." I said, "I know," she answered. "Some conversations deserve space." That sentence stayed with me long after I drove home over the next few weeks. Margaret occasionally called whenever something around the house needed another pair of hands, a loose porch rail, a leaking gutter, a stubborn window that refused to close. None of the jobs were urgent. None of them required me specifically. Yet every visit ended with coffee, conversation, and somehow leaving me feeling lighter than when I'd arrived. I started noticing things I'd ignored before, the way she laughed with her whole heart instead of politely, the way she never interrupted when someone spoke, the way she thanked people without making gratitude feel like a performance. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply treated kindness as if it were ordinary one Saturday afternoon. While replacing a cracked porch step, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Why didn't you hire someone else? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out toward the yard, because after Olivia left, this house became very quiet. I waited, and every time you came over while you were dating her, it didn't feel so empty. I didn't know what to say. I don't mean that the way you're probably worrying I do, she continued. I just missed someone who made a place feel peaceful. Her honesty caught me off guard. Before I could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. Olivia, she stepped out wearing expensive sunglasses and the confident smile. I'd once admired that smile disappeared the moment she saw me standing beside her mother. What is this? She asked. Margaret answered before I could. A repaired porch. I'm not talking about the porch. Neither of us replied. Olivia folded her arms. You've been coming here a lot? I've been helping, I answered calmly. She laughed. Of course you have. You always need someone to rescue. For the first time since our breakup. Her words didn't hurt the way they used to. Before I could speak, Margaret stepped forward. Enough. Olivia blinked. Mom? He helped because I asked. People are going to talk. Margaret smiled sadly. People always talk. They rarely understand. The driveway fell silent. Then she said something neither of us expected. You walked away from him because you thought kindness was ordinary. I won't apologize for recognizing its value. Olivia stared at her mother as though she'd never seen her before. Without another word, she turned around, climbed back into her car, and drove away. The dust settled slowly across the driveway. I looked at Margaret. You didn't have to defend me. Yes, she said quietly. I did. That evening, I almost reached for her hand, almost instead. I thanked her for the coffee and drove home. For several weeks, we kept our distance, not because our feelings disappeared, but because we wanted to know whether they were real or simply born from loneliness and old memories. We met only in public places, a small cafe, a farmer's market, Sunday afternoon concerts in the park. Every conversation made one thing clearer. Neither of us was trying to replace the past. We were discovering something entirely different. Months later, Olivia called me unexpectedly. I owe you an apology, she admitted. You don't owe me anything. I do. I confused stability with boredom. I thought excitement meant happiness. Neither of us tried to rewrite history. Some stories aren't meant to be fixed, only understood. When we ended the call, I felt lighter than I had in years. The following spring, Margaret invited me back to help build a small wooden garden bench beneath the maple tree, where the old fence had once broken. When the last screw was tightened, she sat down, looked at the bench, then looked at me funny. She whispered, "What is?" A storm knocked down a fence and somehow built something better. I smiled. Maybe some things have to break before people stop pretending everything was fine. She reached for my hand. This time, neither of us pulled away. There were no dramatic speeches, no impossible promises, and no perfect endings waiting around the corner. There were simply two people who had learned that being understood could be more powerful than being admired. Looking back now, people sometimes ask how our story began. I usually smile and tell them, I fixed a fence. Margaret laughs every time and adds, and I paid him with pie. Both answers are true, but the real beginning wasn't the broken fence. It was the first moment someone looked at an ordinary man and made him feel that being steady was never something that needed to be apologized for.